Welcome, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. Welcome to this webinar from Horizon4Proteins. Um, it's a it's exactly 3 o'clock. Maybe it's a good thing to start for or to wait maybe for 1 more minute so that people can join the meeting before I introduce the webinar and the speakers and the topics of today. Let's see. All right, so I see so far 36 people have joined. A lot more have registered. So I'm counting on people to still join the meeting. However, we also have quite a full program, so I do suggest that I start with the introduction. So again, welcome to this webinar about alternative protein integration in EU diets. The webinar is organized by the Horizon4Proteins initiative, which is a collaboration between multiple EU-funded Horizon projects. So Horizon4Proteins is as I mentioned, a collaboration between Horizon projects, and it's especially focused on organizing joint communication and dissemination activities, so that we can really reach maximum impact by collaborating between projects who have a similar focus on alternative proteins as part of the transition to a sustainable food system. So obviously, this links in very neatly with the EU Green Deal and the Farm to Fork strategy, focusing on making the EU food system sustainable by 2050. Of course, this is not just about proteins as part of the diets, but proteins are an important part of that, and sustainability aspects and health aspects are important in this regard. So Horizon4Proteins focuses on that part, so alternative proteins, and it was initiated in 2021 by 4 original Horizon 2020 projects: Next Gen Proteins, Chain, Pro Future, and Smart Protein. 3 of them have already been completed, but they're still involved in the initiative. And 3 new projects have joined in 2023. This is Pro, the Valpro Path, Giant Leaps, and also very recently, just in December, InnoAqua. My name is Paul Vos. I work at Wageningen Food and Bio-Based Research, which is part of Wageningen University and Research, and I'm the coordinator of the Giant Leaps project, and I'll giving the introduction to you now. I'm very excited to announce this webinar to you and the topics that we will discuss when we are discussing about the transition to a sustainable and healthy food system. Of course, technological aspects are important, but in the end, we cannot have any impact without consumers changing their behavior and their diets and their dietary and food choices. And that's what we will be discussing a lot about today in the webinar. So first, we will be talking about key behavioral and social cultural determinants of alternative protein choices among consumers. Actually, this was the first planned presentation, but actually due to technical reasons, we will probably make that the last one. We will also discuss the current dietary intake in Europe and how this links to current and future diets across Europe. And we will discuss a family intervention study on the inclusion of insect-based dinner products in regular diets. And these presentations are from the Pro project, Giant Leaps, and Chain. So from 3 of the Horizon projects included in Horizon4Proteins. At the end, there will be a Q&A session. So the practicalities for the meetings are that we have the questions and answers after the 3 presentations to make sure that we have sufficient time for the presentations first. And if you have a question, please raise your hand digitally, so that we as the chair can give you the floor to ask your question. You can also put your questions into the chat. The webinar is recorded and will be available later on YouTube as well. And I guess it's already arranged, but if not, please mute your microphones so that we can have an orderly meeting. With that said, I think it's good to not waste time and to start with the first presentation. Other than is now on the screen, we will start with optimizing the dietary shift on current and future diets across Europe, which will be presented by Esther van Asselt. And I will stop sharing the screen in the meantime so that Esther can start the presentation. And in the meantime, let me introduce Esther to you. Esther van Asselt got her PhD in 2002 in food and microbiology and process engineering. And since 2006, she has been working at Wageningen Food Safety Research as a senior scientist on the topic of food safety. She is project leader of multiple national and international projects, focusing on upcoming chemical and microbiological hazards in the food supply chain. And she is a work package leader in the Giant Leaps project, in which the human diet is optimized using alternative proteins. So, Esther, I think your presentation is already showing, so please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Paul, for the introduction. And welcome all to this presentation. In this part of the webinar, I will tell you the results of the work of one of our PhD students, which is Merel Daas. And she worked on optimizing the dietary shift as part of the EU project Giant Leaps, as Paul already mentioned. She's involved in work package 7, and the objectives of this work package are that we want to assess the dietary shift from animal-based products to the use of alternative proteins, and look at the impacts on both human health and the environment, and compare that with current diets. And once we know that what the impacts are, we want to optimize this dietary shift in such a way that it meets both the health and the environmental requirements, but that is also accepted by consumers. So this work package is shifted within several tasks. So we started with the first task is to compose these future diets. And we are in the middle of finalizing that part, and I will show you in this presentation the results of the work that has been done so far. We will continue with the second task in identifying indicators, and based on that, we can assess the impact of the shift and finally optimize the dietary shifts. The work that I will present, most of the work has been published in a deliverable 7.1 on current and future diets, and that will become publicly available. So if you're interested in the details after hearing this webinar, you can consult this report. So what did we do? The idea is that we look at the current diet, which contains quite some animal-based proteins like meat and eggs and dairy products. And then we want to shift to these future diets, including proteins derived from plants, from insects, from algae or single-cell proteins. And I put a balance in between this transition because we want to make it in such a way that it is balanced both on nutritional aspects, human health, and environmental impact. So the objective so far has been to identify the current patterns within Europe, and we divided Europe in 4 different regions. So the north, that contains the Scandinavian countries primarily. We have the eastern countries, the south, which is presented by Greece, Italy, and Spain. And the other countries are combined into the Western European countries. We use data from 28 EU countries that is gathered within the EFSA food consumption database. And based on that information, we use a model that's called SHARP-ID, in which we can assess the environmental impact the global, the land use and the other environmental impacts. And we use a NIVO table, which is a database that contains both the macro and the micronutrients, as well as the amino acid profiles. So this is one of the results that we obtained. What you see is the current food consumption patterns in these 4 different regions. And you also see the differences between the females and the males. So this is based on these 28 EU countries, but then combined per region. And what you see is overall that in the East, they eat more meat products, whereas in the North, you see that dairy products are more consumed than in the other regions. We also saw that in the South, the females eat more dairy, whereas in the East, more grain products are produced or consumed. And these grain products could also be used as an alternative to animal-based products. So this figure also shows that legumes, which could also be an alternative for animal-based products, are consumed much less than the other products. When we looked at protein intake and inadequacy, you see a figure here which represents on the dotted line the required protein intake, and the solid line shows the actual intake. And what you see is that that is much higher than is needed. So overall, within Europe, the protein intake is higher than is required. And the green bars represent the inadequacy, so the part of the population that has not sufficient protein intake. And that overall you can say that the protein intake is at the moment it is higher than is needed. So that might change if we go to these alternative proteins, but that is something that we will explore in this project. When we then look at the distinction between animal protein versus plant-based protein, you see that overall the total protein intake is more related to animal protein than to plant protein. And meat products contribute most to the protein intake, between 30 and 42%. And what we saw was that meat was more eaten by males from the East than in the other regions. When we look at dairy products, that was the second most frequently consumed animal protein source. That is between 12 and 23%. And these dairy products are more eaten by females, and the consumption is also higher in the north than in the other regions. And when we look at grain consumption, which is between 18 and 26% contributes to protein intake, there were no significant differences between females and males. And like I said, these type of products are primarily eaten in the eastern region of Europe. Then we looked at the environmental impact, so the greenhouse gas emissions and land use. So the top left is greenhouse gas emissions and the bottom right is land use. Again, you see the different regions and the differences between males and females. The green bars represent the absolute values, and the blue bars represent the standardized. So then it's standardized towards the total energy intake, because that differs between regions. When you look at the green bars, you see some differences, but when we standardized it, these differences were, more or less they disappeared. But overall, when we looked at what contributed most to greenhouse gas emissions, it was the meat consumption between 44 and 58%, followed by dairy products. And we see more or less a similar pattern when we look at land use. So meat contributes most to land use, and dairy products is then the second. We had a more thorough evaluation of these protein patterns by doing some statistical analysis. So we did principal component analysis, cluster analysis, and Gaussian graphical models. And we evaluated population characteristics, so the age, sex, body mass index, etc. We looked at nutritional adequacy of the population, nutritional quality, and again, also environmental impact. And then when you look at the results, this is, it looks like a complicated figure, but it is the result of the cluster analysis, in which we plotted the different product groups by food consumption. And at the zero line is the average consumption, and then we looked at different patterns to see if we could group different population consumption population groups. So we have divided it into 6 groups overall. We have a balanced group that eats equal amounts of different protein sources. We had a group that we called junk consumers that consume more processed products. We have a dairy-rich group, which consumes quite a number of dairy products. We have the health-conscious group, and those people eat more healthy products like whole wheat cereals and breakfast cereals, those kind of products. We have a traditional group that eats more meat and dairy products than on average. And finally, we have a plant-forward group, which consists of people that eat comparably more plant-based proteins than the other people. When we look at the overall protein intake of these 6 different groups and then look at the intake from animal-based versus plant-based proteins, we see overall that in most groups there's more consumption of animal-based proteins than plant-based proteins. So for example, for the balanced group, 66% of protein intake is from animal-based products and 34% is plant-based. And the only real difference is with the plant-forward people, which have a more 50-50 intake from plant and animal-based products. When we looked at the environmental impact for these different groups of consumer population groups, we saw comparable results. But the only difference here again is for the plant-forward group, because you see there that the greenhouse gas emission, that is the top left figure, and the land use, the bottom right, is much lower than for the other consumer groups. And that is also what you expect because they eat more plant-based proteins, so then the environmental impact is much lower. So the conclusion overall of the analysis of the current consumption patterns is that most of the European population belong to the balanced protein pattern group, is 42%. And what we also saw that for the plant-forward group, that's at the moment quite a small group. It's less than 2% of the population. They consume considerable higher amounts of the plant-based protein sources while maintaining an average protein intake. And what we also saw that there's quite some diversity of the obtained dietary protein patterns, both in food consumption and demographic characteristics. And that indicates that there is a need for considering cultural differences in eating habits when we shift towards future diets that are more sustainable. So we cannot make one optimal diet for the whole of Europe because there are really differences across Europe between the different regions. And that is the topic of what we are working at the moment to compose these future diets in which we want to replace the animal-based proteins with alternatives for the 4 different regions. And for each of the regions, we decided to select one country that we see is characteristic for that region. And these countries were selected based on population size, the availability of data, but also the language that was spoken, because we also set out surveys in these countries. And we make use of the partners within the project, so then it's easier for us if people speak the language. So for the north, we selected Finland, for the south, Italy, for the west, Germany, and for the east, Serbia. And for each of these 4 countries, we will get the individual level food consumption data and then derive different dietary scenarios. So we drafted 4 scenarios. In the first one, we are going to develop a future diet that complies to the European dietary guidelines, because nowadays people, not everyone consumes according to these guidelines. So we want to see what happens if people would in fact eat according to what is required. The second diet, we will lower the animal-based protein foods because as we saw in one of the previous figures, the total protein intake is much higher than is actually required. So if we can lower this intake of animal-based protein foods, then we might already gain something on environmental impact and nutritional aspects, but that is something we will evaluate. And the third and the fourth diet, we will replace the animal-based proteins with alternatives. In the third future diet, we will replace it 50-50, so that will move more towards this plant-forward group. And in the fourth future diet, we will shift to a 30-70 replacement. So what we will do is we will have a look at what is the current consumption pattern in each of these 4 different countries. And then we will decide to replace things. For example, we can replace a yogurt with a solein concentrate-based yogurt. We can decide to replace a sausage with a sausage that is plant-based, based on fava bean isolates, for example. Or we can decide to replace a salami sausage with something that is produced from cricket flour. And we will substitute it based on the grams, so the amount of grams. Apart from all the nutritional aspects, we will also look at what will be most likely accepted by consumers, and we will make use of the information that is obtained within another work package in Giant Leaps. That is work package 1. In that work package, they are setting out surveys among consumers, and they will, they're actually currently finishing the surveys in the 4 different countries. But the results that you see here is a pilot survey that they performed in Switzerland. The results will be submitted soon to a journal. So if you want to know more about the details, then that will become publicly available soon, hopefully. But what you see is on the y-axis, you see the mean acceptance scores of the different products or protein sources. And on the x-axis, you see the different options. So in the first, you see animal-based proteins, followed by plant-based, then the algae, insects, and all the way to the right, the cultured proteins. And what you overall see is that the plant-based protein sources are more easily accepted than if you go all the way to the right, the cultured meat products. And there are some slight differences between the omnivores and the flexitarians. So the flexitarians are more likely to accept alternatives than the omnivores. But this figure is also something that we will take into account. So it will be less likely that we will, in this future diet, replace meat with cultured meat products, because we already know that those type of products will be less likely accepted by consumers. The partners that are involved in this work package are indicated here. There are more partners involved in the whole Giant Leaps, but these partners are primarily involved in work package 7 in optimizing the dietary shifts. And that brings me to the end of my presentation, and I want to thank you. And if there are questions, like Paul said, we will save that to the end of the meeting. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther, for your clear presentation. That's great. Just a quick check. I think Aleksandra Luszczynska is already in the meeting now and can provide her presentation. Aleksandra, can you share your screen while in the meantime I introduce you? Just
Thank
checking.
you.
Yes. Great. So apologies for having a slightly different order than announced, but it's great to have Aleksandra Luszczynska, who is a professor of psychology at SWPS University in Wroclaw, Poland, an honorary professorial fellow at the University of Melbourne, Australia. Her research deals with psychosocial determinants of health behavior change, including healthy diets, as well as the development, implementation, and evaluation of intervention and policies promoting healthy lifestyle. She's actively contributing to several Horizon Europe projects and Horizon 2020 projects addressing healthy lifestyle, including Like a Pro, obesity, Better for You, and malaria. Aleksandra, it seems that the slides, at least on my screen, have disappeared. Can you share them again? Because I saw them before.
Okay, can you hear me and see the slides? Is it working now?
I can hear you, but I cannot see the slides. I also do not see your camera. They were both in screen before, but now they have disappeared.
I can share the screen or the presentation for you if you prefer.
One more attempt. Okay, is it working now? Do you see the slides or not?
No.
Sincere apologies for the connection. Yes, can I ask Morena then to share the slides? At least you can hear me. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Morena. I will present some results from the Like a Pro project, which is entitled Building a Better World Through Alternative Protein Sources. And you will see the results of first work package, which is addressing the determinants of choosing alternative proteins by the consumers. Morena, we can see it in a view which is the presenter view, not the... Yeah, no, perfect. Thank you very much. I very much appreciate your help. So I would like to present the results from two tasks that partners from Like a Pro has been engaged to within the last couple of months. The first one refers to better understanding the consumer's attitudes and motives in the context of their socioeconomic position. And we conducted a systematic review guided by the COMBI model, which includes factors such as capabilities, motivation, and perceived opportunities, which may be correlates or determinants of the indicators of behaviors such as, for example, willingness to buy, willingness to pay, intention to eat, also acceptability of the proteins. And since there is quite a lot of studies already there and a number of systematic reviews, we decided to do so-called review of reviews, which was pre-registered and address those topics. Next slide, please. Okay, so we tried to be as thorough as possible, and we searched 13 various databases, including databases that address, for example, agriculture, but also health science, of course, and we ended up with 28 reviews which were included into this analysis. Next slide, please. So what we came up with is a number of the factors that can be classified into groups of capabilities, opportunities, and motivational factors, as well as socio-demographical factors, which may be related, and the associations may be relatively strong in terms of the support in existing empirical literature, which we try to identify for different types of alternative proteins. Next. So, for example, if you look up into the factor of capabilities, you will see that formal knowledge, so knowledge or education about the type of the protein, is not supported as a determinant for plant-based alternative protein foods, but it's related to higher likelihood of, for example, willingness to pay or acceptance of insect-based alternative protein foods. In contrast, another knowledge-related factor, which may be called familiarity or number of exposures to alternative protein foods, will be related to both plant-based, insect-based, and other types of alternative protein foods, acceptance, intention, or willingness to buy or to pay. Next. When we look into, for example, the motivational factors, next, could you click, Morena, please? You will see that there are some, for example, emotion-related factors that are linked to specific types of alternative proteins, such as higher likelihood of acceptance or intention to try insect-based alternative protein foods. And these are such emotions as curiosity, but also feeling adventurous or excitement. When you in turn look into gender-related factors, it seems that a kind of a very strong determinant is age. So across various reviews that we looked into, we found that across such alternative proteins indicators, consumer indicators as plant-based and insect-based, younger age was a predictor of higher likelihood of engaging with this kind of proteins or acceptance of this type of proteins. Education in turn was specifically linked to higher likelihood or acceptance of alternative proteins which are plant-based. Female gender, which for quite some time seemed to be an important predictor for any kind of alternative proteins food acceptance, seems to be indeed a factor for plant-based, moderately supported, I would say, based on existing evidence. However, for the insect-based and alternative proteins food, it seems that male gender is a better predictor of acceptance of this type of proteins. Next slide. So overall, the determinants or correlates of derived from the combi model show a slightly different picture for those proteins which are, for example, plant-based. And here, plant-based also include algae-based protein foods. So you will see that these determinants would include, for example, skills in alternative protein cooking, multiple exposures to this type of proteins and perceived familiarity, pro-environmental and sustainability beliefs, animal welfare beliefs, younger age and higher education, as well as perceived health benefits and perceived healthiness. Next slide. In terms of insect-based alternative proteins, correlates or determinants which are referred to combi model would include, for example, curiosity, low food neophobia or low disgust, but also positive social norms for alternative protein consumption and positive perceived cultural norms within the country of origin. So this may draw a picture which suggests that promotion of different types of alternative proteins may require different kinds of strategies which are focusing on certain either types of population or on promoting, for example, a specific type of food as an adventurous or curious related experience. Next slide. We also conducted a systematic review of literature to look up for the built environment characteristics, in particular different types of facilities in built environments and their association with specific barriers of facilitators which may operate in this environment. So this is another systematic review, this time of original research, which was guided first by the Downs et al. Typology of food environments. Yeah, I would like to stress again that we focus here on built environment only. The next slide, please. So again, it's a systematic review of original literature, and we ended up with selecting 36 studies that included that addressed the inclusion criteria. And the next slide. Okay, so here you see a built environment in some hypothetical location, and facilities such as restaurants, supermarkets, schools, farmer markets, or food festivals, where the consumption or buying may hypothetically take place, or it takes place there. And this is the environment for plant-based proteins. And we looked up for the, as I said, the characteristics which are barriers or facilitators or entry points or bottlenecks that would increase the likelihood of consumers' acceptance or intention. So looking into the examples, the next slide. For example, if you check out the alternative proteins which are plant-based, so now we are talking about the plant-based alternative proteins environments, built environment for plant-based alternative proteins. We have seen that research showed that consuming this type of proteins in, for example, vegetarian restaurant was considered as a threat to masculinity for omnivorous men, unless they were visiting with a female partner for whom they were willing to try this kind of food. We have seen a line of research which showed that the beliefs about low social approval for eating plant-based alternative proteins is a barrier for acceptance of this kind of food during meetings, for example, social meetings such as business lunches. We also have seen that creating a restaurant's image as promoting novel foods and chefs emphasizing sustainability and the kind of authenticity or originality of the restaurant was related with higher acceptance of people who were willing to, of people who, of potential consumers. And the next slide. Also for plant-based. In terms of the supermarkets, we have seen the barriers which are reported both by consumers but also by the retail representatives in existing research. So, for example, alternative protein foods based on plants was perceived as hidden in the supermarket. That is, for example, consumers were indicated that it has very inconsistent distribution and location within the supermarket, which makes it less available. And barriers which may refer to the perceptions of the retail specialists that hinder actually the availability may refer, for example, to beliefs such as that it's better to wait for higher demand signals before increasing availability of plant-based proteins, or including plant-based proteins into a meat or a dairy section probably will reduce the profits of the supermarket, or that presenting alternative protein food away from the meat section will satisfy vegetarians. So the next slide, please. If you look up for the groceries or food retailers and barriers and facilitators which operate in this location, you can see, for example, that the sales, experimental studies show that sales of alternative protein-based sandwiches actually were increased when these products were displayed alongside meat products in visible locations, so for example in front of the shop. And also consumers' attitudes such as green shopping or specialty food shopping experience were more likely to be related with the decision to purchase or intention to purchase this kind of food in groceries. Maybe not surprising. Next slide, please. For insect-based alternative proteins, we also checked for the various barriers and facilitators that operate in various structures of the environment. In particular, for example, again, supermarkets or restaurants, but also online vendors. And also we have seen some findings, for example, for food festivals. As in the previous presentation, you have seen that the acceptance of the insect-based alternative protein is low. But if people are asked if they would try, where would it be? The kind of preferred response across the studies that we have found was during some kind of food event like food festival. And the second place that was most frequently mentioned in the studies that we have retrieved was in the restaurants where somebody who is specializing in this kind of food is serving this kind of food. So this is a kind of an entry point or gate for, maybe this is a kind of an entry point or a gate for introducing or increasing consumer willingness to try insect-based alternative protein food. Next slide, please. Looking into a kind of clash within the environmental structures and consumers and retailers' beliefs and attitudes that may form the barriers for wider acceptance in this structure, we see that regarding the online sale, producers say that this is the preferable way for selling insect-based protein products compared to the locations such as groceries, whereas consumers say, no, we would like to see it in the place which maybe is a place where we usually buy food and where it's where we buy kind of daily food, so supermarkets or the groceries, until it's available in the places where we usually buy food. We don't trust it, because if it's sold via these places that usually sell our daily food, then it's related to a higher trust or confidence of consumers in the quality and healthiness of of alternative protein food based on insects. And next slide, please. Okay, some of the last comments we have also seen, as I have mentioned earlier, that well, on one hand side, consumers are willing to try for the first time during this kind of alternative protein during food events or in restaurants. However, the majority of the consumers are unaware that this kind of food may be available in specialty restaurants or gourmet restaurants. And again, restaurants that are, and again, restaurants' image as a kind of environmental advocate was maybe considered a facilitator or increase the likelihood of clients or consumers to engage with this kind of food. And the next slide. Yes, I think this is it. So these are the preliminary findings from our project entitled "Building a Better World Through Alternative Protein Sources," and mostly from Web Package 1 determinants of choosing alternative proteins by the consumers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aleksandra. That's really interesting data, and also very nicely complementary to the first presentation. So I guess also to understand how people can change and well, the more details of their behavior. So that's really interesting. We will, before we go to the Q&A, as explained at the beginning, we will first go to the third presentation. So if the presenters can already start sharing the screen, I will introduce you. So Nana Roos and Cassandra Maya are the presenters of the third presentation, and they're both from the Sustain Chain project. They're also both from the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. And Nana is associate professor at the Department of Human Nutrition. As I understand, she will give an introduction, and then Cassandra will give the main presentation. And Cassandra is a 2023 PhD graduate from the University of Copenhagen. And as a Marie Curie scholar, she has had the opportunity to collaborate with international partners and experts in the field of edible insects. With a strong background in food science and technology and nutritional science, Cassandra has developed a diverse skill set that includes microbiology, analytical chemistry, sensory evaluation, and consumer behavior. The presentation will be about family intervention study, the inclusion of insect-based dinner products in regular diets. And I guess, well, very nicely complementary again, now focusing really on the insects, which are also already mentioned in the previous presentations. First, Nana, you will kick off, as I understand. I guess you need to unmute yourself. You're on mute.
Here we go. Thank you very much for the introduction. And yes, I will just give a short introduction to the work we have done in the Sausage Chain project on insects as food. I have been leading the work package 5, where we have specifically looked into how could insect-based food be a part of more regular diets in Europe as a way to say this is how we could actually release the environmental potential, where we could replace some of the burdening meat consumption with insect-based products. If you can shift the slide, Cassandra. Cassandra is joining in from California and running the slides. So very overall for the work on insects for food, we really aimed to expose consumers to the insect-based dinner product. As I say, this is the pathway to actually get it integrated into the ordinary diets. And to do that, if you look at the bottom, our objectives and tasks were to develop products, and through stepwise sensory testing, quality testing, ending up with products that we could produce in batches, which were actually going into these consumer trials. And from there, we did a synthesis of what could bring insect-based products into the regular diets. So let me jump to the next slide, please. So to do that in real life, we had 6 project partners here on the screen, each being responsible for the innovation and development and also the batch production of an insect-based dinner product. Each of them brought in actually a prototype, and then we started out with gathering in a workshop which was facilitated by Roberto Flore, chef food innovator at DTU, the Technical University in Denmark. And from there, we did a stepwise quality evaluation and ended up with a food basket of 6 products, which could, if we move to the next slide, which we would then move into our consumer interventions. One in Denmark, in Copenhagen families with a child. It could be a bigger family, but we enrolled 1 parent, 1 child, and a parallel study among young couples in Portugal. So these families were invited and enrolled, giving consent, and then over a 6 weeks period, they were provided dinner meals for 3 weekly dinner servings, which could replace what otherwise would be a meat meal. They were all regular meat consumers as an exclusion criteria. And out of here, we were then looking into how could we replace meat with either insect-based, and then we were running what we called a control group with the plant-based, which is a much more familiar alternative protein category of products. So if we jump to the last, and then I will hand over to Cassandra here, just this is some of the key messages which is coming out of our working sausage chain. You can also go to the sausagechain.eu website where the deliverable reports are available, and we also made some best practice sheets also on insect-based product development and some of the technical issues that was worked on from the partner's side. But we actually found that it's possible to make well-liked insect-based dinner products which can be incorporated into the regular diets. We were also challenged to say, well, if it's a meat replacement, we need a certain amount of protein. It can't just be like a trace of insects. We're really moving away from this idea of snack products with a little bit of insects. There is a huge room for either make completely new products. We had that in the food basket, or meat mimics. And we were targeting for a 20% weekly meat protein substitution, and we didn't fully achieve this, neither in the insects or the plant-based. And very, very strongly came out, we need high sensory quality products. I will hand over to Cassandra. Please continue with the more details about the consumer intervention in Copenhagen among families with children.
Thank you, Nana. So here is our list of our intervention products, and we had 6 unique products, as Nana described, that were created by our project partners. Some of them were not meat mimics. For example, we had the falafel and the crisp bread, which were familiar products in the Danish diet, but not necessarily something that looks like meat. We did have 2 meat mimic products, such as this mince and a sausage, and 2 more unique products, which were a chili tomato paste and a spice mix. And those were also accompanying recipes so that they could be prepared into a bigger dish, while other products were more standalone. And these were designed to substitute 20% of the meat intake in a week. And we did this by giving them 3 dinner meals per week. And included in the dishes for adults were 13.4 grams of insect protein. And for children, this was 9.7 grams. And this was determined using the latest dietary reports that we had from DTU. So here is a picture of our products. So we have the insect menu and the plant-based menu there. So those are just the standalone products before they are made into any type of dish by the participants. So all of the consuming of the dinner products was done at home. And because these were still rather novel products, we also took the time to create recipe books for each of the menus. So there's the insect recipe book, and then below the plant-based one. And we tried to make them as equal as possible. So if we created a recipe for bolognese sauce for the insect one, then an equal one was given for the plant-based one. Our results will be hopefully published soon. Our manuscript was submitted and is under review. But here I will share some of the results that we found from our dietary intervention. And the overall objective of the paper was to investigate the impact of exposing families to dinner menus of meals with alternative proteins on dietary pattern, intake of meat, and protein over a 6-week intervention period. So we did have a sister study in Portugal, but here I'll only share the results for our Copenhagen study. So we recruited from the Copenhagen metropolitan area through eBox, which is a digital mailbox that we can use to identify a specific audience of people and send them an invitation letter. So we sent invitation letters to identified 8 to 10-year-old children, and then their adults were able were able to read the invitation and were invited to participate with them. In order to participate, they had to be healthy, as was determined by our medical survey, and then they had to eat meat for at least 5 days a week, so be considered a habitual meat eater. And they should be able to consume both insect and plant-based foods because they were randomized to one of the two menus. They could not participate if they had any food or dust mite allergies or intolerances, and the dust mite allergy was there because of potential cross-reactivity for an allergic reaction. And they could also not follow one or more restricted diets, such as already be following a plant-based diet or have some kind of other limiting diet, such as a keto diet, and they could not use protein supplements. Some of this part of the study was conducted at NEX, which was mostly the baseline measurements, some of the height, weight, and they would come and pick up food for 2 weeks, a couple times during the study, but the majority of it took place at home, which was where the cooking was done, and all the questionnaires that we did were conducted at home through an online link. So here's a flow chart of our study. So they were recruited and then screened, and if they made it through enrollment, we took some baseline measurements. We had taken baseline and end-line urine samples, but that data is not included in this presentation. We also had a 4-day dietary registration prior to being randomized and starting the intervention diet, and it was also done at end-line as well. We took some questionnaire data at baseline, such as neophobia, disgust, exposure, and the meat attachment questionnaire. Then they were randomized to either the plant-based control diet or the insect-based diet, and we ended up with 40 families in each. Throughout the intervention, they did complete daily food records, which would ask them whether they had consumed meat that day or whether they had also either or consume the intervention food and how much of that did they consume. At the beginning and at the end of the questionnaire, they were also assigned 2 random products to give feedback and have some acceptability questions as well. And we only asked about 2 products because we didn't want to overwhelm the participants, especially when they're working with a small child. The parent was usually the one responsible for completing all the questionnaires. And here are some more images of how we completed the intervention, which I thought were really nice to share. So starting with the information meeting, there you have see some of the children actually quite excited to be part of the intervention, and then receiving some of the test foods and showing there the freezer bags full with all the food. And at the end, the children would receive a small diploma and a thank you gift. And here are actually some of the results from the paper. So we ended up sending out over 6,000 invitation letters, and we received 304 responding families. Of those, only 91 were eligible, mostly because a lot of them were already following some kind of more plant-based diet or restrictive diet. And then after screening and enrollment, 3 families decided not to go through into baseline measurements, but we did end up with 80 families, which were randomized 40 and 40. For here, 57 families completed the intervention. 22 of the families were in the insect-based diet and 35 were in the plant-based diet. So here we already see that the insect-based diet was a little bit more difficult to complete. And we decided to calculate that, and we did find that the insect-based menu, they were 5.7 times more likely to drop out compared to those on the plant-based menu. Here's some more summary of results. While we did see in both menus that there was a significant reduction in daily meat protein intake, there was actually no difference between the menus, so both menus were equally effective in reducing the daily meat protein intake. And adults and children in both menus actually maintained their daily total protein intake. So we did see that They weren't just reducing their meat protein intake and their total protein intake, but the intervention diet was actually working at being a substitute for that. We also ran a linear mix model, and we did find that female adults and children both consumed less total and meat protein intake per day. And in adults, meat attachment was actually the only psychosocial variable that had any significant estimated effect. So disgust and neophobia had no effect in adults. And for children, higher levels of food disgust sensitivity were associated with a lower total protein intake. We did not investigate meat attachment with children because of the nature of some of the questions, but it would be interesting to explore in the future. So here we did see that adult and children, yes, both, did see a drop in daily meat protein intake, but how much were they actually able to replace? Nana did mention earlier that we didn't see that 20%, but in adults following the insect-based menu, we did get a 5.5 replacement. And for the children on the insect-based menu, we saw a 2.3 replacement. And for the plant-based menu, it was a bit higher, so adults replaced 9.9%. and children replace 4.3% of their meat intake. Here, I wanted to share some of what we saw from those daily questionnaires. So for those following the insect-based menu, the adults were eating about 2.8 meat meals per week. And throughout the intervention, we saw a decrease about 0.5 meals with meat throughout the intervention. But when we asked them how much they were eating, they responded that they were actually eating about the same amount of meat. So while their frequency was being reduced, their portion size actually wasn't. And for the actual intervention foods, so the insect-based foods, they were eating about 2 intervention meals per week, and they were only eating about half of it. So here from the beginning, we kind of see that we weren't going to reach our target because our study was designed for it to be 3 meals per week, and the portions were designed to have a certain amount of insect-based protein as well, and they were only eating half. For the plant-based menu for adults, it was about a bit similar. They were eating 3 meat meals per week, and we saw a decrease about 0.7 meat meals throughout the intervention, again, eating about the same amount of meat as usual. For the intervention menu for the plant-based foods, they were eating about 2.3 intervention meals per week, but they did eat more than half the portion. For children, they followed about the same trend as adults, with the only difference being that for the plant-based foods, they only ate about half of the portion, as opposed to the adults that ate more than half. We also asked about some of the sensory quality, and although we didn't really see a obvious trend between that first exposure and the last exposure, we were able to conclude that the adults and children did have different preferences. Children actually tended to like the more novel, unfamiliar products such as the spice mix, and they also were quite a fan of the falafel, and the mincemeat was also well liked by the children. We did see in general that there was a bit of a drop in the ratings by Endline, but we can't conclude whether this was because of boredom or maybe some losing of the quality throughout the intervention. And is there a chance for edible insects to make their way onto the family dinner table? We think that the potential exists, but we also think that they will be introduced with other options, such as plant-based options or these cultured meats. And ultimately, the goal is to reduce meat protein intake, and we still believe that edible insects present a viable alternative for this objective, and offering an array of choices, both insect and plant-based meats, will be important. And this will, of course, hinge on collaboration. So there should be collaboration between insect associations to develop and meet quality standards. Food innovators and retailers will be important for designing and promoting these products for specific consumer groups. legislation should help facilitate industry growth, and academic research should also focus on the health and nutritional benefits of insect consumption to provide evidence-based information. And that is all that I have for you today. If you have any questions that don't fit into the question and answer session, feel free to email me or Nana.
Great. Thank you very much, Nana and Cassandra, for your great presentation. Also very interesting results to share, and great to share your results like this with the audience of today. Now we are at the Q&A session. We still have quite some time, so I'm hoping that you have questions for all three presenters, or all four presenters of the three presentations. Morena Silvestrini, who is project manager at the National Center for Food Technology and Safety and the coordinator of the LICAPRO project, will guide the Q&A session. I think you can also manage the raised hands probably from your perspective, Morena, and I'm happy to support by having a look at the chat for questions that come in there. So you're on mute, Morena.
Yeah, here. Yeah, I already see a couple of questions in the chat. A first question for Nana. Alternative proteins, microbial proteins versus insect-based foods. What are her thoughts in big picture?
Excuse me, the microbial for food safety? Or
Is asking for, yeah, perhaps, yeah, your thoughts and ideas about the difference between microbial proteins versus insect-based
okay,
foods.
microbial protein versus insect-based. Well, I haven't engaged so much in the microbial proteins. I mean, insects, we can. I mean, in my view, my interest in insects came from working with the child nutrition in Asia and Africa, and it was with a focus on local food resources, and insects is consumed as an ordinary food. What has been the big step over the last 10 years is that we have moved, insect has moved from being a wild food to being a farmed food. So everything we're talking about here is farmed insects, where we can mass produce insects, and in this way we can control it in the for food safety, but also we can optimize it as any other livestock animal production. So we can genetically, we can domesticate them, we can do it, and in this way we can kind of optimize also for the environmental impact. So compared to so in that way, I would see insects to be rather straightforward. It's smaller than the chicken, but it's an edible animal, and it can be farmed, and you can, where microbial is maybe more a technical and more technical solution. Yeah, if that's will address what's the question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then I see a question for Cassandra. Yeah, why was urine tested before and after the intervention? Was it done to look for safety biomarkers?
So we took urine at baseline before they were consuming the intervention foods, and then they also had an endline urine collection while they were eating the intervention foods. And our initial thought behind this is we were going to use it for validation of their protein intake, but unfortunately we ran out of time to actually evaluate them in time to include in this paper.
Thank you. And an additional question for Cassandra and Nana. Were the insect products designed for the study, or they are already existing products?
The products were developed as a part of the project. So the first tasks of this was work package 5. We gathered the 6 partners, and they all had a prototype product, which was evaluated for sensory qualities, and then we developed an internal standard for what should a dinner product meet of quality criteria to actually be included in these consumer trials. And that was regarding the sensory qualities, but this was also about this incorporating sufficient amount of insect protein to that we would regard it as a meat substitute. So all the products were standing on some prototypes that the partners were at different levels of idea development, and also some had been tested, but they were all went through a very thoroughly development process before it was then batch produced for this 2 times 6 weeks intervention for the 80 families. That's 160 people in each of the in Copenhagen and in Portugal. So the idea was not to test like one product. By doing it this way, it was to get like a diversity of products into this dinner basket. So really to establish a very everyday condition for serving dinners in these 2 types of families, the one with the children that Cassandra presented about, and then in Portugal, the young couples living together and sharing cooking. So of course, this also implies that the cooking skills was a part of the testing. We provided the products, but the participating families, they have to cook it. And from Portugal and also from Copenhagen, we had a process where they could actually submit photos of some of their servings, and definitely, it's a huge part of introducing changing diets for consumers is actually also their skills in the kitchen. What I'm going to do with these products? Yeah. So that's new products. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much, Nana. I see a new question on the chat for Esther this time. The planned forward group was less than 2% of the population, if I got that right. Seems low to me, and is it due to the cost of alternative plant-based products and the current economy, or other reasons?
Yeah, good question. So what we did was we looked at the current consumption patterns based on the surveys that we got from the EFSA database, and then tried to see if there are patterns, so differences between different consumer groups. And one of the groups that we identified was indeed this plant forward group, so those consumers that eat more plant-based products than average consumers. And that was, I think, about 1.5% of all the consumers, so that's indeed quite low. But we did not evaluate what was the reason why this percentage is so low, why only 1.5% of the population eats plants-based products more than others. It could indeed be the cost, but I think it's also related to habits of people. So most people are used to eating animal-based products and are less likely to replace that if they are not urged to do so. So, but yeah, that is my speculation. We did not investigate that. We only looked at what patterns do we see based on the consumption data that we got.
Okay, thank you. Another question here asking for which is the percentage of insect flour in the products tested? I guess that is a question for Cassandra and Anna.
Hi. So it wasn't necessarily insect flour as a certain percent, but each of the developers were able to decide what processing was best. A lot of them were somewhat like went under minification so that we didn't have whole pieces of insect in there, but some chose to use that like ground insect rather than like a dry flour. And we didn't go based on percent, but instead of reaching this 13.4 grams of insect protein for the adults per serving and 9.7 for the children.
Thank you. Thank you. So all the questions on the chat have been answered. So we have 5 additional minutes for further questions from the audience, if any. Yeah, Aleksandra.
Maybe it's not a question, but a kind of a follow-up comment. What we have seen in the last results presented is that it involves young people. So I think this is the population that is, at least from our reviews, it seems that it's a population that is the key target for increasing the intake or willingness to buy or willingness to pay for any kind of alternative protein food. So this seems to be a very well-established finding. So I don't know whether your selection was intuitive or just how it did happen, but this may be for all of us a kind of a target population that we can think of a bit more. However, on the other hand, this population and their choices are very much affected by various social related norms or worries regarding the social approval of intake of this kind of proteins. So from another study that we have just started within the Like a Pro project, we see that young people indicate that, for example, they are afraid of being hated by their peers if they engage in eating insects. So I think it's worthy to be aware to some degree of that this is an interesting target population, and we really intuitively maybe approach this population as a good group for changing their eating behaviors. However, we have to be minded about this kind of barriers that may occur. Thank you.
Yes, Nana, please.
Yeah, just a reply to this about how we recruited for the consumer studies. I was well, it was predefined that in Portugal it was young couples for the same reason as you raised, and in Copenhagen we were targeting this group families with a child in this age group, but we actually invited those were two persons per family were enrolled with consent, and we were taking all the data, but the whole family was provided the products. But it was actually interesting because we were able to invite very completely broadly within this group through our civil registration system, where we could send out these email, e-box invitation letters. So we were actually able to invite everybody that would receive, but we could see of those who responded to be a part of a study like this had certain characteristics, which Cassandra will be publishing in her papers, that, well, it was a very, very highly educated parents, and they were definitely resource-rich families in many ways. And then from this, our questionnaire-based characteristics, we could see that they have a low low discussed, and then it was actually interesting to see how this meat attachment really turned out to be a very, very strong determinant. So I think you can move further from just saying age. You can also define your consumer groups, the relevant consumer groups, more specifically than that.
Okay, thank you. I see another question on the chat. What do you think about percentage of insects allowed by EU regulation? We can add 0.25% in pasta, for example. Where are proteins? I guess that it's a comment for Nanna and Cassandra as well.
Well, the EU is, I don't know, Cassandra, if you're right. I mean, the EU, they approve the EFSA applications product by product, by producer. So they also have approved like the powder. So I'm sorry if I'm not completely clear about that there should be a upper restriction on that. Will be depending on which product that has been applied for EFSA evaluation, which would then go into EC, well, to be released or be legal on the market. Maybe I'm missing something. Cassandra, you anything that you want to add?
No, mostly what you said is what I also thought as well. And maybe if this is a 0.25% in pasta without maybe having to go through the application process is maybe what I'm understanding. Not completely sure, but if you are having a very low allowance for how much insect you can put in there, then you would definitely, be limiting how much protein, we can provide, and then also limiting actually using insects as a meat replacement, and then again framing it more as just a supplement rather than, going through this replacement route and then making a bigger impact.
Yeah, so it's more related to the product type where this with these limits, because the pure powder has been for several of the insect species is now approved.
Question. Can Esther share the link for Nivo database platform?
Which database platform? Oh, the Nivo database. Yes,
The Nivo
I can share that. Yeah.
I don't see any other new comments on the chat. No more questions from the audience. If not, I guess that, we can close the webinar. Paul, I don't know if you have any additional comment to make.
No, I think it was very interesting. There are so many touch points also between the different projects to further explore, but we would need much more time than in a webinar. But no, other than thanking the speakers and the audience, I have no further contribution.
Okay, so we can close the webinar, and thanks to all the attendees for participating in this event and the presenters as well. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Thank you
Bye.
very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.